Top 5 things USA men's national team need to do after the Copa America failure to improve. All right, let's go. Number 1, we need to fire Greg Berhalter. His time with this team is done, in my opinion. I said before Copa America that he needs to prove that he is the coach to lead us into World Cup 2026. He has failed. It's time for him to move on. Now, I do want to qualify this. I think this is the least important point in my entire 5 points. And I also think his first 4 years were pretty much a success. He met expectations. Now he has missed expectations, so it is time to move on. We have enough time to find the correct guy to replace him. Who that's going to be, I'm not even going to speculate, because I don't know. All right, number 2. Number 2 is we need to quit panicking. Stop panicking. Panicking over this just makes you sound weak, and it makes us sound like we have no confidence in the team whatsoever. Facts are, this is still a good team. We had a bad tournament, but that doesn't mean we're incapable of having a good tournament 1 year in the Gold Cup or 2 years in the World Cup. These players are young. Some of them are still obviously immature, Tim Weah, and they will mature in the next 2 years, and we're going to be a better team because of this. So quit panicking and just accept it. Sometimes in sports you lose, even games that on paper you should win. That's okay. Dust yourself off and prepare for the next game. Number 3, we need to identify and develop more technically proficient players. One thing I've noticed in this Copa America is while our players are good players, most of them are playing for teams in Europe, many of them in the top 5 leagues in Europe, they are not as technically proficient as the players on the top teams in both Europe and South America. And this is especially true for our defensive players, Matt Turner's foot skills, and our midfielders. And the reality is, even our attackers aren't as good as they should be. In fact, Christian Pulisic is the one guy who I truly think is already on that level. The rest of the team, they need to step it up. Now, number 4. MLS needs to play its part. And that part for MLS is they need to raise their wages. That way, they can attract better players, both American and international, to improve the level of our domestic club soccer here in the USA. And they need to actively try to bring Americans to the teams. And I know this is going to be a bit controversial for a lot of you, because you think MLS is bad, Europe is better than MLS. And that's not necessarily true, and especially when it comes to USA men's national team, there are actually maybe some advantages for at least some of our players playing in MLS over a European team, especially if they're not playing in one of the big 5 leagues or they're sitting the bench for their team in Europe. Gio Reyna is an excellent example. Do you really think he's better off sitting the bench at Nottingham Forest or Borussia Dortmund compared to being a main player and a star on a MLS team? I actually think it would benefit Gio Reyna to get that treatment as the main guy on a MLS team. Now, I'm not saying he has to do this. That's ultimately up to him. But he's not the only one. There are several players, in my opinion, that playing in MLS would actually be a plus compared to playing in Europe in either a weaker league or sitting the bench for a team in one of the big 5 leagues. And lastly, number 5, be patient. I know a lot of you are very, very frustrated and you're losing patience with the fact that USA men's national team is not to that top level yet. However, this was always going to be a slow and gradual process. Fact of the matter is, if we look at the long term, we're already on path. Soccer in America is completely unrecognizable from it was in the 90s. This current team is the most talented USA men's national team I have ever seen play in my lifetime. And I'm not going to let the results of one tournament tell me that that's not true, because it is true. However, I also want to point out that this is almost definitely the very worst USA men's national team any of us will ever see for the rest of our lifetimes. Facts is progress in American soccer was always going to be generational. It's not something that hiring one new manager or recruiting one dual national was going to change and all of a sudden we win World Cups. It's the kids living in America now, growing up and maturing to better soccer players than their parents, then their kids growing up with that improved soccer culture and becoming better players than their parents, which will eventually get us over the top. So when we look at the reality going forward, 2026, what should the expectations for USA men's national team be? Realistically, dark horses. We're not going to be among the favorites, and we shouldn't be among the favorites. That's an unrealistic prospect. But we could be dark horses to make a long run in this tournament. As long as we play to our potential and we get a little bit of luck on the way, hopefully the crowd will be the 12th man, we could make a quarterfinal or even a semifinal, and it's not entirely impossible to even make a final, but we are a dark horse. Realistically, we will not be favorites to win the Men's World Cup for another 10 to 15 years at the minimum. Those generations have a realistic prospect of doing so. 20, 30 years from now, I actually think it's very, very likely that we will have won a World Cup by then. And the reason is soccer's growth in America has just gone so far from where it started in the 90s, especially before the 1994 World Cup and 1996 beginning of MLS. All our MLS teams have free academies. Many USL teams have academies too. They're pay academies, but they're still producing talented players. And club soccer and high school and middle school soccer are helping develop talent better than ever before. Not to mention, maybe the most important element of all, when I go to the park on almost any given day, unless the weather is just completely awful, there are a collection of teenage kids playing pickup soccer. The fact that we have regular pickup soccer here in rural Tennessee tells you something. We're developing a culture for soccer here in America that simply did not exist 30 years ago. And going forward, that soccer culture is only going to be better. And that gets to my very last point of point number 5. We have to develop our own American identity for soccer in this country. We need to stop caring what the Europeans think. Fuck what the Europeans think. This is America. We play American soccer.